Community Association to join us. Thank you. I don't know if you followed yesterday's submissions, but there's been a lot of discussion about whether we can still pursue the idea of a single council ward for Banks Peninsula. So I just note.
We understand.
Yeah, good. Right.
Loudly and clearly. Hello. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here, actually. And we were just saying when we were sitting up there, what a nice feel it's all got. You know, it sounds like you're all quite pleased to be here, which is great. So,
It's a comfort.
So thank you for the opportunity to present this response on behalf of the Heathcote Valley Community Association. I'm the current chair of the association and Judy is the current secretary. The information we submitted in writing was the outcome of a discussion held at our October meeting, and this presentation further develops the main theme or concern raised, which relates to the matter of representation. However, before we talk about anything else, we'd like to acknowledge the public pre-consultations carried out between November 2014 and March 2015. Both of us attended the workshops, which we thought enabled a high level of discussion and engagement throughout all communities. Our assumption is that the information gathered at these events, reflecting a desire for smaller wards and more councillors, plus ideas about how participants defined their communities, helped to inform the contents of the Council's representation review proposal. So we'll be presenting around three main themes: communities of interest, the need for effective representation, and the need for fair representation. So communities of interest are described in the guidelines as areas of distinct identity based on topography, economic or social activities, socio-economic or ethnic characteristics, distinct local history, and dependence on shared facilities.
As mentioned in our written submission, overall our community is divided about the issue of whether the inclusion of Heathcote into the Banks Peninsula Sumner Ward offers an appropriate reflection of shared characteristics. It is fair to say that the majority of our residents believe that our community has more in common with urban neighbouring suburbs rather than with what is perceived to be the more rural communities that comprise the Banks Peninsula. Other residents point to the fact that all of the communities which would make up the proposed subdivided ward, i.e. Littleton, Diamond Harbour, Governor's Bay, Port Levy, Quail Island, Heathcote Valley, Monks Bay, Mount Pleasant and Sumner, are defined by the geographic landscape which has made for strong community spirit, similar values and shared sense of identity in each place.
It's interesting to think about whether the matter that I'm going to talk about in a minute relating to effective representation actually affected the way people saw themselves in terms of the community of interest, you know, because it's thinking about effective representation, which covers matters to do with accessibility and size of the area, avoiding arrangements that may create barriers to participation, not splitting communities of recognised interest and not grouping together communities that share few commonalities. There's complete agreement in our community that if Heathcote Valley is to be incorporated into the proposed Banks Peninsula Sumner Ward, the proposed level of representation simply will not work. Given that a look at Banks Peninsula and Christchurch on Google Earth shows that Banks Peninsula is at least 5 times the size of Christchurch, it seems to us that Council has strong grounds to argue a case for treating it as an exceptional case. We believe that one councillor should not be expected to represent a population that is so widely spread and diverse, and that to try to do so will absolutely create barriers to participation for our community and for the other communities as well. In addition, we think that the Akaroa, Wairewa and the Littleton Sumner community boards need to elect 6 members each for the same reasons that we've outlined above. So, thinking about fair representation, we understand that the Local Government Commission has required the Council to explore the need for all areas to be more or less the same size and with a population within plus or minus 10% of each other. However, we also understand that the requirements in the Act and guidelines give particular emphasis to the role of communities of interest, noting that it is an essential part of the representation process and needs to be carried out before determining what fair or effective representation. This representation review proposal makes a judgment about communities of interest and has incorporated Heathcote Valley into the Banks Peninsula Sumner Ward, but does not ensure effective or fair representation. In fact, whether the Banks Peninsula Sumner Ward remains as proposed or reverts to the status quo, the situation remains that the geographical spread and isolation of some communities plus the mix of diverse communities make it a distinct identity.
We believe that a representation review should mean that the level of representation communities enjoyed prior to the review is not compromised. In the case of the Banks Peninsula Sumner Ward, we urge the Council to argue for an exceptional case scenario. If we were to be included in this ward, we should have the same level of representation, if not more, than all the other urban wards.
We were actually interested to note that at some meeting previously, councillors resolved unanimously on the motion of the Mayor that the Council's preference is that the Banks Peninsula community be combined with other communities to form a ward that complies with the definition of fair representation of the Local Electoral Act 2001, preserving the option of the Akaroa Wairewa community to be treated as an isolated community. So it seems to us that you've already identified that part of that Banks Peninsula ward has specific and exceptional needs in any case. So we strongly urge you to reconsider the representation arrangements to include 2 councillors and 6 community board members, which would go some way to compensate for the diversity of rural and urban communities, as well as a land area that's much more difficult to service, being far larger than all the other wards combined. Alternatively even, the Council should put the case to the Local Government Commission for Banks Peninsula to be kept as a separate ward. And if that was to be the case, we believe that Heathcote could easily be included into the Linwood-Burwood Coastal Ward. Thank you.
Yep. Questions? Andrew?
Thank you very much for your submission and for coming here to present it today. I'm particularly interested in the relationship between the Banks Peninsula and other neighbouring areas that may share a community of interest with Littleton or Banks Peninsula. And I've got a couple of questions. The first of which relates to exactly that. Now, we heard a submission yesterday that suggested that Littleton and Heathcote do represent a community of interest. We heard about the Littleton people coming to the newly built pub in Heathcote, and we heard about the Heathcote people going to the dairy in Littleton, and if pubs and dairies define a community, then great. Is that the view of the people in Heathcote, that Littleton does share a community of interest with the people in Heathcote Valley?
I think that's difficult. I always feel uncomfortable speaking on behalf of the whole community when we haven't really talked about that. I would say instinctively yes, up to a point, but we also feel we have strong connections with Sumner, Redcliffs, and even, you know, Ferrymead and parts of Linwood as well. Personally, I feel that we have a strong level of commonality with the Littleton community. But I mean, I guess, you know, you people, I guess, will have to think carefully about what you do next, and you will be thinking about which communities, you know, could fit together to make this whole thorny issue of effective representation work. You know,
if we were to look at taking the middle ground, and this might help tease out what I'm looking for. If we were to take the middle ground of not going with what's proposed in the model that's in front of us, but not going with Banks Peninsula as an isolated community, status quo, and we were to look at saying maybe Sumner and Heathcote, or Sumner or Heathcote, have a particular community of interest with Littleton that other areas like Mount Pleasant, for example, and we heard a submission from Mount Pleasant yesterday, that those other suburbs in the middle don't have. Would you feel that you had a stronger connection with the waterfront suburbs on the city side of the hills, or a stronger connection with Littleton and the peninsula?
Again, that's a really different. We have commonalities with all of those communities, and I would think that probably Heathcote Valley residents would be split on how they would view that, in the same way as Jackie and I probably are. So we certainly do have we do have strong links with Ferrymead in particular. They're our closest neighbour. Shopping's done at Ferrymead rather than at Littleton. So in those, in that way, we certainly do have more of an interest on the city side rather than the bay side.
And the final question.
But we are connected by the tunnel,
Yes.
which Sumner is not.
Yes.
So, you know, there's those kinds of, I mean, you know.
And the final question, there's a certain sense in your submission that if we set the community of interest issue aside and we look at now the representation issue, that by joining in with the peninsula, that inevitably means a lower level of representation than you've had.
Yeah.
And I'm getting a sense that it's almost that by joining the peninsula, you're inheriting the same sort of concerns that we heard from Akaroa people yesterday afternoon.
That's right.
We're really concerned about that. We're really concerned that our level of representation will drop. And you know, there's so many issues in our valley, as there are in so many other communities, but we have been incredibly badly hit during the earthquakes. We've had the floods and all of those other issues that have happened for us, and we have really, really appreciated the fact that we have had our councillors available to us and our community board. If we were only represented by one person and 4 community board members, we've got some problems.
Well, not just for us, for the whole
for everybody.
of the community. I mean, I don't, you know, we're talking about 16 wards here, and one of the themes that came up at the community meetings that we were part of was that people were wanting smaller wards and more councillors because, you know, that we felt that the represent. I mean, there was another proposal for 19 wards. I mean, you know, is that another issue that could be looked at again in the light of all these submissions? I don't know.
Phil?
Thank you, because I think we're coming to the nub of the issue. And just to sort of firm this up, you outlined 3 clear areas that you were concerned about. So that was the communities of interest, effective representation, to be fair. So of all those variables, and it's hard to say which would be the priority, but just from your comments now, are you leaning towards that the major factor for people in Heathcote Valley would be having effective representation?
Absolutely.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Glenn?
Thank you. You used what I thought was a strong term, divided, over communities of interest in relation to including Heathcote into the ward. would like to know how strong that is, or to try and kind of measure that feeling. So if we talk about, say, is it to the point that you'd feel the ends of local government wouldn't be served over, say, community wellbeing with such a division? Is it that strong, or?
No, I don't think anyone would want to die in a ditch over the...
No.
It's just that it's a way of describing the fact that we have different thoughts about,
Okay. So it's okay.
Yeah, it's-
Division of thought.
Yeah, it is.
yeah.
And it's all about representation. I mean, that's the crux, as Phil said, yeah.
Yanni, 10 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. I was just, I mean, just in terms of the communities of interest, I mean, if I look at Heathcote, the local volunteer library has a relationship with Wolston and Redcliffs.
Yeah.
If you look at the issue that we had as a community, water in the Bridle Path right turn going towards Sumner,
Yes.
which
Hurrah!
was, so in terms of that roading and those community facilities, it seems to me that you focus more towards the coast and more towards the city rather than out to Littleton. Are there any other facilities where you actually see Littleton being part of the community?
Restaurants, cafes.
Yeah, exactly.
I think if I lived in
Absolutely.
Heathcote, I'd be going through that tunnel quite frequently
Yeah,
rather than to
precisely.
Berrymead.
Yeah.
But I think that's
It's
that's
convenience,
that's the issue. It's what is convenient for the moment. And Yanni's just raised a really good point, which is that there are issues that are going to be much more relevant to Heathcote
True.
on the city side of the
It is true,
of the
yeah.
tunnel. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Look, thank you very much for your time. You've given us food for thought, and I hope that my comments at the outset indicate that we are very open to, reviewing what we put in front of the Local Government Commission, aware of the fact that we have to mount a case because the Local Government Commission ultimately will make the decision. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.